Welcome to the Podcast Editing and Support Show. My name is Dave. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go. We're going to start the episode right now. Happy to have you here. Let's do this. All right, we're back with part 3 in our podcast planning mini-series. The idea behind all of these is to create this framework, template, sheet that kind of guides you through how to do your podcast and how to structure properly. It is available through my podcast editing and support show website. Link in the show notes, as always. Thank you for being here. My name is Dave. I should say hi. Hi. Glad to have you here. So if you haven't heard the first 2 of these in the little mini-series we're doing, you can always jump back. You don't have to listen to these in order, but they build on each other, and they're all around what I use for a template, kind of a planner sheet that I would sit down with a podcaster and then give to them as a guide for them to record their episodes, which is going to make your job as an editor so much easier when we have a plan. So take this, use it, tweak it, add to it, delete from it. It's totally up to you. But I find a lot of podcast producers, editors, support people don't have a starting point when they're meeting with new clients. And this is a tool for you for free that you can use for your business. So if you need any help with this, reach out, podcasteditingandsupport.com. Glad to have you here. Let's jump into this. Today we're looking at the essential pre-recording checklist for new podcasters. And it's all around planning and producing with confidence, because I think that's something we could all use, a little more confidence, right? And this is a tool, part 3 in the tool, that's going to help you down that path. A new podcaster's pre-recording checklist. Here we go. Starting a podcast is an exciting journey for, I think, everyone, really, when you think about it. And having a podcast business that supports podcasters, one little bit even more exciting, because you get to be part of the process and help people find their voice as a podcaster. It's a noble and exciting thing that we can do as podcast editors and support people to equip people on their journey to become the podcaster they've always dreamed to be. And you can be a big part of that. So congratulations on signing up for this. There's a long road ahead of you, but it's going to be full of great rewards as an editor and support person. The proper planning around a podcast is really essential to ensure that you're going to have a smooth recording process as an editor. You're working alongside of your podcaster and for the podcaster themselves. So it's kind of simplified a comprehensive pre-recording checklist to help you to prepare for your podcast episodes. I love working with the podcaster, not just getting the completed file from them and just doing the ums and ahs and sending it back to them, but actually being part of the planning of the show with all our knowledge, ability, talent, skills, everything we've learned by working with other podcasters. We can bring that wealth of knowledge to a new show and help them be successful by avoiding some of the pitfalls, but also helping them to be successful. So the first part of all of this is I want you to sit down with your podcaster and write out a script or a detailed outline for the show. So why are we doing this? What's the purpose of having a script or detailed outline for the show? A script or an outline is going to help serve you as a roadmap. And back in the day, we had these things called paper maps, and you actually have to buy them at like the gas station. And this big piece of paper would have all of the directions and all the highways and roads to get to the place you want to go. Today, we have all on our phone, so that's different. But for me, I used to have paper maps in my glove compartment of my car, and that kept me on track. That was fun. This script and detailed outline is kind of like a map, kind of like a GPS for your show. It's going to help you keep focused and organized during the recording process, which is going to save time, money, frustration. It's going to keep you on track and help you meet those milestones and to know you're on the right path. Because you don't want to be down a road when you don't know where you're going and find out it's a dead end. And that happens in content creation and podcasting quite often. So what are some components of your detailed outline and your script, kind of for your idea of your show? First, your episode title. Clearly define what the podcast episode is about. You're going to hear a lot of feedback, a lot of opinions around the podcast title. What's good, what's not good, what to do, what not to do. It has to be right for you and the podcast host and what their goal is for the show. So you can offer suggestions, but at the end of the day, the host is the one that's going to decide what the name of this episode is going to be, and you're going to be working along them, but you can gently guide them towards some good practices around episode titles. As well, you're going to need some main points. Key topics, things that you want to cover, must-haves that must be in the show, anything that comes up like that, you need to make sure that you make note of that so you don't miss it. The last thing you want to do is hit stop on the recording and then go, oh no, I didn't cover the A, B, and the C. Oh no. So make sure you have an idea of your mapping out your main points so you kind of know where you're going in the content. A great idea. Make sure you bring that up to your host and they're aware of mapping out where they want to go in each episode. As well, transitions are really important for you as the editor, for the podcaster. And the other thing about transitions, it's kind of nice. You don't actually have to record the episode in full in one take. You can record them in bite-sized pieces, kind of like how I do this episode. I'm recording them in chunks. I'm putting in little noises in between, little swipes, little whooshes. These sound effects kind of take you to the next step, but I'm recording these in chunks instead of one full recording in one shot. You can break them into little pieces, and transitions are great because you can then plan on how you're going to move from this topic, this segment, to maybe a new topic or a different segment. You kind of know where everything is. They're building blocks. They all work together, and when you do that, you assemble a beautiful little house called a podcast. So use transitions, but plan them out as well. Don't just let them happen. Plan out how you're going to go from A to B to C to D. The other thing would be all around a call to action. That's a very popular term in podcasting. It's a marketing term, and marketing is, well, salesy. So I kind of lean people more towards instead of call to action, what about a pathway to engagement? So instead of a CTA, we got a PTE, pathway to engagement. We're going to lead the listener to the next logical step after listening to the episode, after watching the video. What's next? And I would like to propose to you, to propose to your podcaster, that whatever that pathway to engagement is, should, for the most part, benefit the viewer, the listener, the person that's consuming the content. Simply giving you a rating and review, although nice, really doesn't serve the audience. It more serves the creator, which is okay. Go ahead, ask for that. But I would say the majority of your pathways to engagement should be something that benefits the listener and the viewer of your podcast. So think about how you can frame or create something that benefits those that press play on your episode. Buying you a coffee is nice. That's an engagement piece. Going to your website is nice. That's an engagement piece. But when I get there, when I do the thing you're asking me to do, and I'm being led down the pathway to engagement, where's the benefit to me? That's what I'm asking you to provide to your podcast host. So there's a clear call to action, pathway to engagement, that your listeners do after the episode. Could be subscribe, visit the website, follow me on social media. Again, one pathway to engagement, not multiple paths. One call to action, not multiple. Lead your listener to the next logical step after the episode. I talk to so many podcasters who have no idea what to do at the end of their show. They do the content, they do the thing, and they just stop. It's like, well, okay, what's next? Like what? Listen to the next episode, go back to a previous episode. Where do I go next? Remember, your podcast listeners and viewers, some of them are here for the first time. They don't know anything about anything. So they're looking for a gentle nudge towards the next logical step. So write out a detailed script outline. Now, this is not a script word for word, what you're going to say on the show, but you're going to cover your episode title, the main points of your podcast, the transitions, and the call to action. One more thing about episode titles. Why is it important to map that out? As a podcast editor, the title of the episode becomes the file name for the file that I'm creating for my podcaster. I can't tell you how often I get an email, a Google Drive submission for an episode, and it just says episode 32. Okay, episode 32. Okay, I know the number, it's numerically where this is going, but what is this episode about? What's the name of the guest? What is the topic? What's the main idea? How is somebody going to find this if they went to a search engine? I need to know more. So having an idea from your host at the beginning about the title of the episode could then become the file name for your episode when you do all your editing. So it's a good idea to know that right off the top. The second part in all of this, around a pre-recording checklist, would be to prepare your introduction and your outro. And that right there was a transition, by the way. Your intro and outro is something that you need to have a conversation about with your podcast host. There are many different ways that you can go in this direction, and you need to figure out what works for you. You can always change it. You can always adapt. You can always redo this and change plans, but you should really have an idea of where we're going with our intros and our outros. We need to craft a catchy opening that grabs attention. Remember, people are pressing play and they're deciding whether or not your show that you're working on for that podcaster or as a podcaster, if the show is worth listening to at all, they're making a decision in that moment to put their phone away and to commit to this episode. So you want to make sure that you hit them hard, hit them right away with what this content's about and grab their attention. You want to put phones in pockets. That's your goal with every single opening that you do for your podcast. As well, introduce yourself, podcast theme, all of that information at the beginning, and then briefly outline for your listeners what they can expect in the episode. That's what we need in our intros. What do we need in our outros? To summarize what happened in the podcast. That's a great thing. Give a summary, a recap. In this episode, we talked about A, B, and C. Also include any promotional messages, social media, handles, website, pathway to engagement, and thank your listeners and encourage them to come back and to continue being a part of the show. That's a good intro and that's a good outro. I talk about this on my How to Podcast series. It's another podcast that I do about podcasting. And I like to challenge you with this. Consider that your intros are for a brand new listener who is new to your content and they don't know who you are. Introductions should be framed in the context of a new listener. Outros should be framed in the context of a listener who knows you, is in community with you, has been listening for a period of time. They understand what the show is about and they like coming back. The reason why I'm saying that is everybody starts at the intro and everybody's making a decision, whether you've been there for the first time or you've been there for the 100th time. The intro serves people at the beginning, and a lot of these people don't know who you are. So make sure you introduce yourself. So your intros are for new people. The outro is where people who have committed to you and listened to your podcast in the entirety of it, they are your community members. They are the ones who are most likely to respond to any of the pathway to engagement pieces that you put in front of them because they've committed to being here with you. They're going to respond more than somebody who's heard you for the first time. They don't even know, like, or trust you. So at this point, they're not going to respond as much as somebody who's been there with you this whole time. So intros are focused more on new people who have no idea who you are. Outros are focused more on people who know, love, and trust you and are willing to come back again. So frame it in that context. It really does help you to prepare a great intro and an outro. Your intros and outros can have music. They can have all kinds of different things. But whatever elements that you put into your intros and outros, make sure music is short, to the point. There's no vocals that are over top of your spoken vocals in the music. You don't want to have competing vocals. Very confusing. Make sure that the music's not louder than your voice. If I have to fight to hear the voice of the person speaking because the music's so loud, remember that. And remember, the style of the music sets the tone for the show. So if it's a dance beat, okay. If not my choice, but if it's a dance beat, great. If it's Celtic music If it's polka, if it's hard rock, if it's calm, reflective music for your meditation podcast, the music style needs to fit the theme of the show. Don't have a loud clown carnival music for a podcast around the funeral industry. You don't want that. That's competing. That's not going to work. Make sure that everything you do serves the podcast in your intros and your outros. The third part of all of this around creating our pre-recording checklist involves, if you're interviewing a guest, what you need to do in preparation for a guest interview. Guest interviews are a different animal than a solo podcast. So it's worth calling out some prep that needs to happen in the back end so that you understand how to do this right. So if you're a podcast editor and support person, you might be called upon to do the guest setup, where you're actually going to reach out to potential guests. You're going to arrange to have them come on. If there's a pre-interview, you're going to arrange that. You're going to arrange all their assets, their photos, their bios, their book covers, whatever. You're going to arrange all that for your podcast host. Your guest information is really important, and you want to gather that in advance of anything that happens on the podcast or a pre-interview. As a side note, I do love pre-interviews because that gives me a chance to, as a podcast host and an editor, I get to hear what my guest looks and sounds like. I get to hear if they're using a laptop mic or if they actually have a mic. I get to hear if they are in a noisy environment or a nice quiet environment. Are there distractions? How do they sound? Do they answer questions or are they one-word answers? I get a good feeling for the person before I meet them for the recording. So I always do a pre-interview. Not everybody loves doing pre-interviews. Not everybody does them. But for me, the benefit of a pre-interview is I get to answer all of the questions that I don't know the answers to by simply meeting with somebody. And then weeks later, we get together. I've had a chance to do my research, come ready to do the interview. And we're not meeting as strangers, we're meeting as friends. So I love pre-interviews. There's some preparation materials that need to be collected. And you as a podcast editor and support person are a great resource for this. You can share an overview of the topics you're going to discuss when you talk to your guest in advance, and also include any background information that might help them prepare as a guest. I've worked with a lot of guests on my shows that have never been a guest before. First time guest, never done this. They don't know if this is a radio show, is it live? What if I make a mistake? They have no idea what's going to happen. So I'm working with them as a new podcast guest. So remember, not everybody that comes to your interviews has ever done this before. So you need to make sure that you create this platform that they feel safe and secure, that you know what you're doing and that you are driving. That's a great feeling for a guest. Also, the other thing to talk about beyond guest information and prep materials is just the logistics about recording the podcast. Confirm the date, the time, and the platform that you're going to be using for recording. Remember that not everybody's technical. So some of these more expensive online recording software sites, Riverside, StreamYard, all these places, some of those can be a little bit difficult for someone who's not tech savvy. So for me, I have tried these sites before. I'm always trying them to figure out what's next. I find by default that people embrace Zoom, and for all of its limitations, there are some great recordings that have happened just through Zoom. So work with your host, work with the podcast host, figure out what works best for them, and use it on a consistent basis and set it up the right way. If you ever have any questions about setting up your platform for recording, reach out to me. Love to help you. So we've talked about the different elements so far about creating your pre-recording checklist. We've talked about writing your script or an outline. We've talked about preparing your intros and outros. We've talked about interviewing your guest and some of the things that you need to do in prep. The other thing to do as a podcast editor and support person that you can help with is the preparation of questions. When we have a guest on your show, you can be a huge asset to the podcast host by doing the research to help them. Remember, your host is hiring you beyond the ums and ahs. we can do much, much more. You can be the one to go through and familiarize yourself with the work of the guest, listen to and watch them on other podcasts. That's going to be a huge benefit because you're going to get a sense of whether or not this person is talkative or quiet, if they're funny or serious. You can give that information to your host so they can prepare better. You'll be a huge asset to any podcaster just by doing the research on the guest that's coming up, understanding that your host might not have time to do all this. This is a value add to your suite of services that you can offer. Again, beyond the ums and ahs, because anybody can do an ums and ah edit. The other thing you can do is create some open-ended questions for your host to ask the guest. So beyond yes and no answers, you can help by creating some questions specific to the guest because you've researched them that they may never have been asked before or haven't gone deep on that topic before because you've done your homework and you know that they don't talk about A, B, and C quite often. So maybe that's a good line of questioning you can offer to your host as optional questions. Not that they have to be asked, every single one of those questions need to be covered, but they're always nice to have a few in the can. If the conversation kind of drifts and the host is trying to get back on track, you can provide some great questions in advance. And they need to be open-ended. Again, not yes and no. And not how did you feel, but what did you learn? How are you different? Those are great questions because now the person has to think and put themselves in there or tell me a story about the time you wrote your book. What was it like? What did you learn in the process? Those are great questions to ask your guest. As well, you can prioritize the questions and arrange them in order of importance. It allows some flexibility, natural conversation, but your host then has this list off camera that they can use. Remember, though, even when you have a list of questions, always listen to your guest. Your guest is steering the conversation with their answers, and you never want to leave an answer that's not been addressed or acknowledged and simply go to the next question. You want to make sure that if your guest says something spectacular, that you always follow up. The next part in this is all around the tech side of helping your podcast host in the recording side of the podcast. Something you can really help with is the setup of the recording equipment and testing the audio and video for your host. So if you've worked in podcasting at all for any length of time, you're going to meet people at different stages and levels of familiarity and the ability to use technology properly. You might have to do some hand-holding at this stage to help them be set up and ready to go. Especially if your podcast host is disorganized, has a short attention span, does not come prepared, does not do their homework, and has never been on a microphone or a video camera before. You need to spend some time working with them to get them comfortable enough where that the technology is not a distraction to them during the interview or during the recording of the podcast. Fumbling around with a mic, banging into the mic stand, looking the wrong way on camera, any of those things can be a huge distraction and a huge edit point for you, causing you frustration and time that you can solve at the beginning when you work with your new podcaster. So the equipment setup, simply ensure that you have good quality microphone, headphones, and recording software. You're the expert here. Guide and direct them towards the right things that are going to make them sound and look great. As well, help them set up any additional equipment needed. If there's video, for example, lighting on and on backdrop. I watched one video recently and it looked like the person was podcasting from their junk closet. Like there was stuff like all in behind them and it was like very visually distracting. So you want to help your podcaster, if they're on video, to have a decent background or at least blur it or something so that it doesn't become overwhelming for the person that's listening or watching the video to go, what is going on behind them? It's very distracting. Help them with their equipment setup as well. Test the audio. Make sure you conduct tests before you jump into the recording. I love some of these other platforms. We talked about Riverside, all these other ones, because they will allow, in some cases, for you as a podcast editor and support person to be behind the scenes, off camera, but at part of the recording. You could be the bad cop, and the host can be the good cop. You can be the bad cop and say, okay, guest, I need you to sit closer to the mic. Guest, I need you to put the cat away. Can you put the cat away? The cat's like meowing. Can you shut the window because we hear the jackhammer from across the road? You can be the person to be the one to make the sound better, and you can be kind of behind the scenes during the recording. So make sure you test everything. Make sure that people tap mics to make sure the mic is actually engaged and on. There's no on-off switches. You want to make sure everything's right. Why wait to the end and try to fix it? Fix it before you record. It's great. Adjust microphone placements and settings as necessary, and then listen back to ensure that there's no technical issues. Background noise, humming fans, loud bangs, all that stuff. I had someone send me a track, and they recorded, and in the background was a 4/4 count with a clip track in behind them that you would use for music. So you have that boom, ch, boom, ch, boom, ch, and then they spoke over top of it. And I'm like, okay, well, I need you to re-record that because I can't remove that track because you're talking over it. Little things like that, you can be a huge help to your podcaster. Keep that in mind. So all of these things are part of my checklist. Again, that's available through my podcasteditingandsupport.com website. Reach out to me. I'll send you a copy. It's just created in Canva, but it captures everything that we've talked about today as elements of that document. So I'm explaining it to you without you seeing it visually, but I'd love to share a copy with you as well. You can go in here, edit it, change it, use this as a guide, turn it into a paper airplane, whatever you want to do with this. But the idea is to give you some thoughts and ideas that will help you shape a better relationship with your podcaster as an editor and support person. So by following these pre-recorded checklist ideas, you're going to be better prepared to engage with a more professional sounding podcast episode or video podcast. But remember that preparation is the key to delivering valuable content. Content that's going to resonate with your audience. I want the best for you and your podcasting business. So if this could be one more thing that you can offer to a podcaster beyond the ums and ahs, let's get beyond that. Let's do more as a podcast editor and support person. That's the whole point of why we're doing this, right? To get more clients and to serve them better, make more money so that we can do this more often. That's what it's all about on the Podcast Editing and Support Show. Thanks for listening to the Podcast Editing and Support Show. Visit us at podcasteditingandsupport.com, podcasteditingandsupport.com. We would love to help you find a great podcast editor, or if you want to hire us, we would love to work with you. Podcasteditingandsupport.com. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.